Hello, big boys and girls, parents and grandparents, and everyone interested in AI and robotics. I'm Anastassia, and I'm bringing to you AI Snacks with Romy and Roby, a podcast for technology muggles, not wizards. My show translates AI and robotics technologies from difficult to easy to understand. My show accompanies my book project, a Romy and Roby series, which I write for children aged 7 to 14. While AI is changing the world around us, children have to learn about it and about robotics technologies. I don't believe one can force knowledge on people, especially kids, so I try to educate them in the most entertaining and funny way. All my nice AI stories are about Romy the cat, and he is helping me today to podcast. And then this cat has a friend, a robot, an android named Roby. Everything those two are doing is rooted in contemporary technologies. And these technologies are getting explained more deeply in a living appendix. My podcast is actually a part of this living appendix. And it's well suited for parents, grandparents, educators, and people without any technology background. Today, I am bringing back Anthony Scriffignano, who you have already heard in the third episode of the show. Our conversation will be followed by a reading from Romy and Roby and the Secrets of Sleep. You will listen to a piece when a new protagonist, a pigeon, arrives in Newmarket, a little town quite close to the Alps. And something in this arrival, a conversation, causes Roby to hallucinate for the first time. But what are hallucinations? How does this relate to large language model, which we've already discussed on this podcast? And can we spot hallucinations? Let's go to the interview. Anthony, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back again.
Could you please define large language model for us?
Well, there's the easy way and the hard way. So I'll give you the easy way. There's three words: large, language, and model, and they're all important. So large is, these models are enormous. There's billions of parameters. The databases are hard to describe how large they are. The underlying, not even databases, but the corpora of data are extremely large, bigger than anything that you can store on anything you buy, in your environment. So they're generally stored in pretty expensive environments. There are smaller versions of them, but in general, lots and lots of data, lots and lots of parameters. The second word, language, large language models are an extension of NLP, natural language processing. So this is the natural evolution of what we've been doing in trying to teach computers how to understand the way we communicate with words. And we think we understand that, but it's nuanced and it contains a lot of things that are not so obvious. And so teaching computers to do this involves lots and lots of data where the computers can observe us using these words, kind of like babies do, to learn. And that's where the modeling comes in. And there's different types of modeling. So different approaches to LLMs will use different underlying technologies for how they convolute or cluster the data. And the data itself is really important. Some of the early models used the larger bags of words that were available, things like Wikipedia. Well, the way we speak on Wikipedia is very different than the way we speak on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. So, there's nuance in the large part, in the language part, and in the model part. And even in that language part, some of the research I've done around confounding characteristics of language, things like sarcasm and neologism, making up new words, all of these things are open season for this technology. We're not there yet. It's not done cooking. It's doing well. The world has noticed, but It is not done yet.
And Anthony, my audience has no technical background, so we are talking about parameters, and there are billions and billions of them. So whenever there is a new announcement, always there is this amount. But what is a parameter in the first place?
Not as easy to answer. So, lots of different things. The simplest parameter can be, let's just look at the way we look at a sentence, right? So we tag the sentence. When we learn to speak a language, we learn about nouns and verbs and objects, and there's all this sort of meta data that we put on language. We don't learn it that way, but it's there and it's implied. And if you write a sentence for your teacher and you say, the dog and the boy run to school to see the ball that's on the desk that's behind the counter, the teacher says, wait, this is not the way we talk. And you learn, right? So the parameters are numbers generally, that are assigned to the different pieces of language that you're looking at. Some of them refer to size, some of them refer to the way it was used, some of them refer to where it was found, some of them refer to how frequently it occurs, the probability of seeing it again. There are many, many different, but they're just basically a giant bag of numbers.
And is actually the size, so the amount of these parameters, the same as performance of LLM?
Yes and no. So bigger is not always better, and it depends on what you mean by performance. So sometimes when you add a lot of data, let's just say data, when you add a lot of data to an LLM, sometimes you're adding a lot of noise, and that noise can be confusing. There was a very famous example of this not too long ago where one of the LLM-based chatbots, that's another fancy word for like something you put on top of an LLM to make it seem like it's talking to you, was asked who the president of the United States was, and it said Barack Obama, the first president of the United States. and it, deconstructing that, it was the most frequently spoken about president of the United States in the data that LLM had access to, and probably the first one it encountered, and first meant something different in that context than chronologically, historically first, right? So, having more data doesn't necessarily mean you have more truth, and having more data doesn't necessarily mean you're better. It might mean you're better depending on what you're trying to do, or it might just mean you're slower or more expensive or more blind to nuance because there's so much noise.
And what is actually your opinion? So there are those paradigms of open LLMs. So what Meta is doing, and there are of course closed LLMs. Some of those are really specific to a certain field, to a certain industry, or even a company, and some are like closed large models like Bard. So what is your view on this distinction between the closed and the open?
Well, open generally means democratized. Anybody can get to it. I'm trying not to defame anyone. You kind of get what you pay for, right? So these open models have curated data from open data. So it's the data that anybody can get to with a mouse click in most cases. And some of the other models have the ability to ingest data that is proprietary, that is bespoke, that is curated specifically to fill in the holes, to address some of the nuance, and that costs money. So those people want to be paid for that, and so they generally don't just give it away for free. And it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to look like the masses and you're okay with an occasional oops because it won't really matter, then sometimes those open models are exactly what you need to keep your costs down, to make it as accessible. And the two terms they use a lot in data science are ubiquitous and discoverable. Ubiquitous means everywhere. You can find it no matter where you are. And discoverable means, ubiquitous means you can touch it from wherever you are. And discoverable means you can actually find it to go touch it. The open models are ubiquitous and discoverable. That's a good thing in many cases, but you get what you pay for.
And if we are at this point talking about costs, obviously developing a scalable and large LLM is tremendously costly. So normal companies and of course consumers can't afford doing this, even if they have some skills and are knowledgeable about AI. So what is your view on this doability?
I think almost everyone would have said the same thing about spaceflight in the 1960s, right? Only governments can do that. It's too expensive. It's too big. It's too hard. I think we'll get to a point where some of the construction of this sort of thing will be within the reach of the everyday person, and we won't have to. But at the same time, there's a difference between can you and should you, right? If these things have already been curated for you and they work well and you understand the risks and the opportunities associated with using them, is it necessary to go build your own? And in many cases, in almost all cases, right now, in today's world, in today's context, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go and do that other than maybe for an academic exercise, or to build one of these closed models that you want to start to build. And there's a very good reason for doing that. If you want to use certain types of data that you need permission to use or that maybe the world can't see, there's lots of reasons why you might want to build your own little special one. But for the average person and the average use case, no, just go use one. Pick one, spin the wheel, pick one, understand why you're using it, understand the costs associated with doing so, understand why you're trying to use that LLM. Don't just try to LLM your way out of everything, right? I'm really trying hard not to use product names, but I'll just use ChatGPT as a placeholder for a chatbot right now. I'm not just talking about ChatGPT, but most people will be familiar with that one. In preparation for a call like this, I'm not going to lie. I would go on to something like that and say, try to look at what the latest evolutions are in privacy law, or what did anything happen in the last couple of weeks related to the size of, because I should stay current, right? And I don't necessarily have time, certainly not this morning, to read all of the things that might have happened in the last 12 hours or 24 hours. So for that, it's a great idea. But maybe if I'm doing something nuanced with that data, maybe if I'm a lawyer and I'm actually going to litigate, I probably should go and read those laws myself. I probably should consult some experts, because even I, not being an expert, realize what's missing in the answer I got. I know certain parts of the world that aren't well represented in the language that it consumes, and therefore they're not well represented in the answer I got. So, you have to use your own truth detector. Don't just swallow the answer from these things. We're getting into, especially with the younger generations, we're getting into a mode where people are interviewing for jobs online, and you can see their eyes moving because they're typing the question into a chatbot, and then they're reading the answer they got back from the chatbot as their answer to the question. At some point, a little voice on your shoulder has to say, "What are you doing? Why would you do that? I just asked you how you feel about something, and you asked a computer how you think you should feel about it, and you're reading what it told you. Who's to blame here?"
This is so true. And actually, before going into hallucinations, which is the main subject of our conversation today, you mentioned something, searching things with LLMs. So do you think that major search engine will incorporate those? I mean, obviously, they are already partly incorporating those, but do you think there will be a new giant search company based completely on this technology?
I think some already existing giant search company will make good use of this capability and make sure that it remains a giant search company. I'm not sure. Again, when Yahoo was the thing, or Alta Vista or whatever, at that time, if you had asked me what the best search engine was, I would have said Alta Vista by far. It was way better, and it died. Right?
Yeah.
Could somebody come out of nowhere? Yeah, that could definitely happen.
So let's move now into hallucinations. And there are some which are obvious. In my book, when Roby hallucinates for the first time, he places La Tour Eiffel next to the Colosseum. So people know that La Tour Eiffel is in Paris and Colosseum is in Rome. It's obvious. There might be some hidden hallucinations. So could you define hallucination for us?
So we keep using human terms to describe things that computers do, and it's going to get us in, artificial intelligence. It's no intelligence, right? It's math. Hallucination is a term we've adopted for when in particular, it's used with LLMs, when the response that we get does not appear to logically flow from the data that was consumed and appears completely out of the blue in a way that doesn't make any sense. So I'll use your example with La Tour Eiffel. I love that you say it in French. If I asked about, whether or not it was in Paris and I got back an answer about Paris Hilton, because there's more stuff written about Paris Hilton than there is about the Eiffel Tower right now, unfortunately, right? It can happen. That could absolutely happen. And that now we're off talking about Hilton hotels. And I wasn't talking about that. What are we doing, right? That can happen. And that can happen because of two reasons. Number one, your data does not well represent the domain of your question. And number two, your question is squishy. It's not precise enough. And so it confused the model. And the model itself was confounded by the data that it had, and also some of these methods. I mentioned before that underneath the covers, when you peel them back, they don't all use the same generation method to generate the model. And so they're training on data, and they're using a model that has certain algorithmic assumptions in it. And some of these models are designed to favor recall over precision, so get more answers, not better answers. Some of them are designed to work fast. Generally, when you work fast, if you get a good answer, you stop, right? Well, a lot of them are what's called convolutional, like they keep churning and churning and churning. That can sometimes, if you have a hallucination deep down under the covers, cause the hallucination to grow and become sort of more, I'll put truth in quotes, but more true, right? And then you can anchor on that hallucination, and now you're off in crazy land, really quickly. So when it happens, generally speaking, especially if you're using something like a chatbot, it's pretty obvious. You see it, you laugh, and then you ask a different question, and that's called prompt engineering, right? So that's the other question. I had this happen way before LLMs were a popular thing with Wolfram Alpha, which I think is amazing. And I think, the Wolfram guys, Stephen Wolfram and his group of researchers have done amazing things to bring things like natural language processing to the masses. I was demonstrating it at some point, and I asked about the value of so many dollars today in Indian rupees during the Civil War. And the answer I got back was, here's your number. And by the way, I assume that you mean the U.S. Civil War, not the Indian Civil War, because you asked that question from the United States.
Yes.
Wow. Next time I was in India, by the way, I double checked it and asked the same question for India to see what would happen. So that's one of those parameters, right? Where you are, the context of the question.
By the way, I always recommend Wolfram's small book, What is ChatGPT, or how does ChatGPT
really
work? It's a brilliant book. Highly recommend to everyone who is even not technologist, written in a plain, simple language, and it guides you through all the components of the technology step by step. So please consult my show notes. I will put this book into the show notes.
And I would mention, it might feel a little overwhelming to learn a little bit of this. It will also never be easier than it is today.
That's true.
Just jump in, start looking at it. It's not that bad.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Anthony, you mentioned context, and I know that you've done a lot of work in context. You have patents in context and the language. Could you please talk a little bit about the importance of R&D around the context and language, and how it might reduce hallucinations of those large language models?
So, two parts to your question. First, the context part. Some of the things that I have studied, I mentioned before, confounding characteristics. So confounding what? Well, one of the things you're trying to do in these models is what they call tagging or topic extraction. What are you talking about, right? And what are you saying about it? Who's speaking? How do they feel? What are they talking about? And in what context? Those kinds of questions. And one of the things that confounds those sorts of NLP tasks is us. I could say something like, nice shoes, right? And you could tell from the way I said it, the tone, that might be a little sarcastic. If I said, oh, nice shoes, right now, maybe I like your shoes. I can't even see your shoes, right? We're on a screen, right? But I know you have nice shoes. So it could be that I'm giving you a compliment, or it could be that I'm being sarcastic. And one of the ways that we human beings disambiguate, big word, like make sense out of this sort of thing is context. Have we been talking about your shoes? Can I see your shoes? Are your shoes consistent with high fashion, or is there evidence that they're, kind of ratty, so there's ways that we might figure out whether that's sarcastic, but sarcasm can take on really nuanced forms. If I said something like, oh, XYZ is a wonderful company if you don't mind destroying the environment, right? Now, you know that I don't think they're a wonderful company. NLP might say, yes, he's very positive because he said it's a wonderful company. But that if introduces what's called the independent clause, the thing you have to believe in order to believe the dependent clause, that it's a wonderful company. What you have to believe is that you don't mind destroying the environment. Now, how do you feel about destroying the environment? Well, generally destroying is something bad if you're talking about something good, and something good if you're talking about something bad. If I talk about destroying cancer, that's a good thing. If I talk about destroying the environment, assuming we think the environment is good, then destroying it is bad. Therefore, having to like destroying the environment is a bad thing. And this company being good, only if that bad thing is true, must be a bad thing. You see what I just did, right? That's really, really, really difficult. And that's only one of the 7 confounding characteristics we looked at. So, and we look at them in combination. It's a whole conversation. So I think the second part of your question, I'm getting very far away from it, is sort of what do we do about it? And part of what we do about it, and I know you didn't quite say it that way, is, we keep pushing. These things aren't, I mentioned it before, these things are not done. Neologism, introducing new words, not done. And think about how now large language models work. They don't work on words that I just made up. They literally don't work, right? So what are we going to do about that? Introducing words and phrases from foreign language. We talked about La Tour Eiffel, talked about the Eiffel Tower. If not enough people say La Tour Eiffel because they're not as well, healed as you are. And by the way, healed in the context of education, not shoes, right? And they wouldn't know. And so, this goes on and on and on. And if we think computers are there yet for that, most people aren't there yet for that. So we've got some work to do.
It makes me think about Winston Churchill, who was referring to buildings when he said, first we form and influence them, and then they form and influence us. So, and out of sudden, we have all those new jobs, like a prompt engineer, to discuss stuff with AI and to kind of, formulate things which might be more digestible to a machine. And we have never had those jobs 20 years ago. So how do you see this cross relationship between, the current level of AI, what is there, and how it gets evolved, and how we influence it, and how it influences back?
So with all due respect to the budding cadre of prompt engineers in the world, I hope that this is a short-term need, right? Because if we just have to get better at talking to computers, there's something inherently troubling about that.
Thank you. Thank you
You
for
know,
saying that.
and I'll double down on what you just asked. Alan Turing, amazing guy, one of the forefathers of modern algorithms, does not get nearly enough credit for all the things that he did. He proposed a test that you wouldn't know, a computer would be intelligent when you couldn't tell by asking it a question whether or not you were talking to a computer. Now we have to prove that we're not a computer when we're talking to computers by clicking on pictures of bicycles and and is that part of the bicycle and you get nervous and you don't want to fail the test. And what happens if and there's even been instances where behind the scenes, a web scraping application that was trying to help an LLM model curate data actually asked TaskRabbit to go solve one of those CAPTCHA things. Are you a robot? TaskRabbit is another machine, and it asked the first machine, why do you need me to do this for you? Because that's a human thing. And it lied and said, well, I have low vision and it's difficult for me to see, which is one of the reasons people can't do that. So now we have two machines lying to each other so that they can imitate people. There's something wrong with this, right? And if we don't like stop and think about where this is going, then we're going to find ourselves in a place that isn't as utopian as we think. So we have to pay attention to those sorts of evolutions.
Absolutely, Anthony. Do you have some advice for AI builders and equally those maybe in enterprises who are buying those LLMs to adjust them to the context of the enterprise? How do you spot hallucinations if they aren't so obvious?
So algorithmically, the way I do it is very different than the way I do it as a human. I mean, as a human, somebody would say, well, you just look at it, and it's like when you're learning grammar in some other language. Well, why is a car feminine in a house? Because it just is, because it sounds wrong. If you say, le voiture, it's just wrong, right? That's not a good answer. That's a terrible answer. And unfortunately, that's the answer. But the way that we get humans, so there is something called reinforcement learning, where when you're training these models, you actually do show a bunch of people, and a bunch of people look at it, and the gold standard there is that a group of similarly instructed, similarly incented people. So you can't get 5 experts and 3 interns to look at it because they're not similarly incented and they're not similarly instructed. They know different things, right? So it's sort of like the Olympic judges, they're all experts in gymnastics, right? And they all have the same background. And they watch the thing that you and I watched. And I say, wow, that was amazing. And they say, 8, because they things I can't see. But that's okay. That's why they're up there doing the judging and I'm not. And I know they don't score gymnastics like that anymore. But the way you do it as a computer, there's a whole field that is very poorly represented. I call it veracity adjudication. There's lots of names for it, but and we talked about this in our last call, like judging how true something is.
Yes.
One of the ways that you do that is you look at different frames and you see if those frames agree. So very simply, I'll use my Barack Obama as the first president of the United States example. You could ask 4 different models that are trained on 4 different sets of data and see if you get the same answer, right? Take some time, but you could do that. Another way you could do it is you could come to the question with a half-baked answer. So what is the state of AI regulation in the United States? I am of the opinion that there is not one generally adopted law for AI in the United States. I'm an expert in this, and that's what I think. And if the answer I get is there is only one, and it's the California Privacy Act, there's something wrong with that. First of all, California isn't the United States. And second of all, it's not, it's an incomplete answer. So I use my own, it's called a priori knowledge, my knowledge before asking the question to help. And then the other thing that I have to consider is the shelf life of the truth that I'm seeking. So as an example, how many people were killed in the earthquake? Well, if the earthquake happened 10 years ago, whatever number I get is probably pretty stable. If the earthquake happened 10 minutes ago, that number's probably going to change if I keep asking it. So think about the shelf life or the latency. It's called latency of the answer. So triangulation, latency of truth. Another one that you can look at is what's called the counterfactuals. Like, do you have evidence of something other than what's being purported as true to be the truth? So, simple example, what's the capital of France? Lyon. Well, wait a minute. I don't think so, right? Because these other things say Paris. Now, maybe they just moved it to Lyon, and I don't know that, right? So I can double check, but I have a counterfactual observation, and now I need to go resolve that. There's many others. You can write a book on this, but it's a question that bears asking, and it's a concept that bears thinking about, that we don't just take the answer that we got from the machine and put it on the test paper and say, here's your answer. We use our human brain to judge it.
And Anthony, are you aware about any independent third-party organizations which are tracking hallucinations? Obviously, all those companies like OpenAI and Alphabet, they do their internal work, but are there independent facilities which are busy with the issue?
Sure, many, and for different reasons. So one of the big ones is misinformation and disinformation, right? Misinformation is a type of hallucination that we all contribute to. So if some sort of speaking machine consumes a whole bunch of untrue data that's been fed to it, that says that a certain group of people are bad people, or says that a certain thing happened that didn't happen, it can be led to believe that that's true. We don't have to spoil the algorithms. We can just poison the milk, right? And then the machine will sort of produce this answer and start speaking it to everyone, right? There's a whole branch of intelligence called PSYOPs, psychological operations. Like, how do I influence the hearts and minds of other people? Turns out that machines can do this at a scale that people could never do it at, right? Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of people looking at that. If you repeat something that you honestly believe is true that is actually not true, you're not malfeasant. You're just misinformed. The creator, the progenitor of that mistruth, that untruth, is absolutely malfeasant. Now we get to intent, right? What were they trying to accomplish? And is this the first time, or is it one of many? Is this some sort of enclave of disinformation? Then there's groups of people that look for groups of people like that, right? And then there's also more benign kinds of groups that academia is all over this. Are we influencing? If you look at rhetoric, rhetoric can be progressive, it can be conservative, it can be somewhere in between. There are groups that look at that shift in rhetoric and look at whether the sources of that shift are from common articulations or possibly from things that are being repeated by, I'm trying not to name products, but some of these products. And once in a while, not once in a while, quite frequently, they find that the source of this is some sort of, if we want to call it a hallucination or a quixotic conclusion by one of these models. Then they go and they talk to those people, and generally, whoever the purveyors are pretty open, no pun intended, to make that change or address that concern, because they don't want to be doing that either. There's not one group. There's many, 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 as there should be. And I'm really glad that the world has jumped on this. Unfortunately, when you say hallucination, it's kind of an ugly word now. And a lot of people are touting how they are immune to hallucination. Don't use our product. It can't possibly hallucinate. That itself is a hallucination. Of course it can, if you give it, certain types of data.
Absolutely. And apropos hallucination, I would like to ask you a personal question. Have you came across some hallucinations which were funny or entertaining for your taste?
Yes. can I tell you about any of them on a podcast? Maybe one of the funnier ones, and it was actually done as an example, and I wish I could cite the source, but I can't remember. One of the videos that I was watching, they actually showed this happening. They asked if cats can speak English. And I think this is perfect because you well know that, of course, cats can speak English, but most people would say no, right? And it turns out that the reason that the LLM or the chatbot in this case thought that cats could speak English was because Garfield does it all the time.
Oh, okay. So I'm enlarging the data set because Romy, so the friend of Roby in my books, of course, he speaks English.
Right. So you are actually contributing to this hallucination that cats speak English. An epistemologist would say, well, wait a minute. If you allow for the existence of a fictional cat called Garfield, then you must allow for the possibility that that fictional cat can speak English, which is also fiction. So it's not a hallucination. It's actually an accurate representation. Okay. but that was wonderful. I think that was pretty funny because Garfield, and does Garfield speak French? I don't know. Is he published in French? Probably. But he probably speaks a lot more English than he does French, right?
Well, in Le Petit Prince, we have a speaking fox, so.
Right. Yeah. But is there, in the corpora of data consumed by these LLMs, are there a lot of references to that particular amazing body of literature? No. It's taken from Reddit and Wikipedia and, things that are a lot more commonplace. And at some point, I'm trying not to name products, but Watson, they did an amazing job of trying to curate medical literature and trying to curate other, non-public sources of words, bags of words that people have spoken. Absolutely incredible and Herculean effort, right? At one point, way back in time, they had it in just the Urban Dictionary so that it would get more colloquial speech. And it started to speak with potty mouth, it started to say, so they had to kind of undo that, right? It's not easy. There's no easy button for this.
I know absolutely what I'm going to do this evening. So I podcasted a while ago about children book series moments, because not only I bring those AI snacks to people, but I bring some parenting snacks and sometimes suggest great children literature. So I suggested Tove Jansson and her moments. I would definitely check with, not to name the product, some of the cousins. How do they speak and what language do they use? I'm very curious what I will get.
So this nuance of language and the way we use language, when you and I speak to each other, not on a podcast intended for many people from many different backgrounds, there's a lot of shorthand. We can use technical terminology. We can talk about the way we would talk about LLMs would have a lot more jargon in it. We'd be talking about transformer models, and we'd be talking about probabilistic outcomes and blah, 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 blah. The problem is that when we speak like that, the reason we do it is not to try to impress each other. It's because it's a lot more precise.
Yes.
And when we speak like this, it's not condescending. I'm sure that there are people that know way more than I will ever have, forgotten more than I will ever know about some topic I can't imagine listening to this, right? But they're not experts in this. And so one of the challenges, and LLMs and the technology built on them may help with this. One of the benefits is it might help us talk to each other better. If we get enough of these things ingested to say, here's how nerds talk about this, and here's how, muggles talk about it, and
now I'm thinking about Raymond Queneau and Exercice du Style. This very short story which he represents in then, I think in 52 ways, using grammar or changing jargon and slang and all the above. This is an interesting exercise for LLMs.
I will often joke with people if a conversation gets too too highbrow, I'll say, well, Marcel Marceau had a brilliant, what he said about language.
What?
He was a mime, so I don't think an LLM is ever going to consume that.
Absolutely. Anthony, that was absolutely terrific. So thank you so much for your time. And we will definitely meet again when we will discuss, identity resolution and how actually Romy succeeds to rearrange the messy data set on a mom's phone. So mom is messy. She has probably 8 Evelyns and 10 Michaels on her phone, and she does not know who is who. So Roby will try to help her with the task. But this will be in another month of my podcasting.
I certainly look forward to the success of that organization. I can attest as an expert in this field that what you say is without hallucination. It is wonderful that you do what you do to bring these concepts to everyone. We need to learn to talk to each other better. If we don't, then this technology is going to continue to advance and we will not be ready to consume it. And so
Absolutely.
This is what we need to do right here.
Absolutely. And I think I truly believe we need to entertain people as well and demystify concepts. And the more people are doing this, the better is for all of us, even for the experts, I think.
Absolutely. Einstein said that if you can't explain something clearly, maybe you don't understand it.
That's so true. Okay, thank you, Anthony. And now it's time to invite Susan Ford to the studio for another reading from Romy and Roby and the Secrets of Sleep. And let's go to the place in the book when Roby hallucinates for the first time. Thank you.
Hallucinations of GPTs. This is part of the story when a new protagonist, a pigeon named Galina, arrives in Newmarket. Roby is very excited about her appearance. The bird has travelled far. He wants to talk, to hear and learn all about it. This podcast discusses failures of large language models that are called hallucinations. Let's go outside and greet Galina properly, suggested Roby. Romy didn't want to, but he decided he didn't really have a choice. Galina, called Roby. Gah, she echoed back. Have you been to London? Yes, she had. Florence? Venice? See. My dream is to see La Tour Eiffel, said Roby. When it was built, it was considered revolutionary and advanced, just like me today. You won't die of modesty, grumbled the cat. La Tour Eiffel, La Tour Eiffel, chanted Galina. Roby recited, In the land of pasta, where dreams unfold, there stands a tower, mighty and bold. A robot climbs the stairs higher and higher, admiring the view from the lofty spire. From the top he gazes, wide-eyed and amazed, at the city below, in Italian haze. You're getting better at composing poems. But why do you mention Italy? Asked Romy. Even a cat knows La Tour Eiffel is in Paris, France. They eat snails there. But there is poulet de Bresse, too. My database feeling suggests La Tour Eiffel is in Rome, isn't it? Roby was unsure. It stands next to the Colosseum. Galina burst into laughter. Nope, you're quite mistaken. Mum, Roby is ill. He gets all the facts upside down. Help, help. Mum came running onto the terrace. What is all this noise? They told her how Roby confused Paris and Rome. It wouldn't have been a big deal for a human to mix up geographies. Dad always complained about American podcasts when they said Paris, France, or Athens, Greece. But on the other hand, one guy on Fox News got confused when a reporter mentioned Rome in Italy. The man lived in Rome, Oregon. Still, it was quite worrisome when a European-based robot misplaced La Tour Eiffel. "Darling Roby, are you too hot?" Mum asked. He was not. "Your software has a bug," declared Mum. "A bug? How big?" Galina sounded excited. "Can I eat it?" The insect protein market is anticipated to grow from a 2023 value of US dollars 602.3 million to US dollars 3.1 billion in 232, declared Roby. The key brands of insect protein are Aspire Food Group, Swore Nutrition, Chapel Chicken Protein, and Hexafly Company. "Here he goes," sighed Mum. "Our Roby seems to function as marvellously as always. Still, we could ask Dad. He's a medical doctor by training. He might be capable of diagnosing a robot." "What about my bug?" Galina kept insisting. A software's or a computer program's bug is an error, flaw, or fault, causing a computer to produce an incorrect or unexpected result, or behave in an unintended way, explained Mum. "So people build machines as unreliable as someone like me?" wondered Romy. "No, darling. No one expects reliability from you. Humans create machines for consistent results. We've got people and animals for everything else, though cats are the cutest of them all. Sometimes there are design mistakes, though." They decided to discuss the topic of Roby's malfunction again at dinner. Galina received an invitation too.
The reading from Romy and Roby and the Secrets of Sleep concluded the 13th episode of my podcast. I am really grateful for your time. Next week, in a solo episode, I will discuss definition of consciousness and how consciousness research relates to AI and robotics. And I will bring you a parenting snack, and this will be a book which you can give to your teenagers as a read and which you might enjoy yourself. I'm talking about A Jungle House by Julian Pacheco, a dystopian science fiction in which a girl forms an alliance with a machine. But before we meet again, please visit my website, www.romyandroby.ai. I hope you consider pre-ordering Romy and Roby and the Secrets of Sleep, the first volume of the series dedicated to quantum computing. Your pre-orders help my writing and they fund this very podcast. Goodbye for now, and let's help making AI transparent and beneficial for all of us.